A reciprocal graph is one that is of the form y equals 1 over x. This one value could be, say, 2 over x or 3 over x, but anything of the form y equals 1 over x is going to form a reciprocal graph. And when you draw this graph, it's going to look like, very roughly, it's going to look like this. And what happens with this graph is that these axes, the y and the x, are asymptotes. So this graph here gets really, really, really close to the axes, and here, and here, and here, but it never touches them. And that's what an asymptote is. So these two lines are called asymptotes. And in this case, the x-axis here, that is, the equation of that line is y equals 0, and the equation of the y-axis is the line x equals 0. So those are the two asymptotes in this graph. And you can kind of see why it works, because as x gets bigger and bigger and bigger, then your value here is going to be 1 over a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger number. So it's going to get really, really, really small, but it's never, that y value can never equal 0. No matter how big that gets, you're never going to get to 0. So it's going to get big and big and big, smaller and smaller along here, but never get to 0. And the same happens here as you sort of get along here. As x gets smaller and smaller and smaller number, then the y is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, but you can never put in that x is 0. Remember, we can't divide by 0, so x equals 0 is impossible, and that's why that's an asymptote. So we get bigger and bigger and bigger, but it just keeps going. We can never put in the value where x is 0, and those are your two asymptotes. Okay, so if you're given a graph like this, y equals 1 over x plus 2, then there are a couple of ways of thinking about it. One way you could think about it is thinking, well, the function in this case, our fx function, is 1 over x, and this function is f of x plus 2, is 1 over x plus 2. And we know by our transformation of curves that from here to here, the plus 2 inside the brackets with the x, the graph shifts to the left 2 places. So this graph is going to look the same as the last one, but it's going to be shifted across the left 2 places. So your asymptotes, it's now going to be, if you imagine shifting it over to the left 2 places, where that y-axis was is now going to be at minus 2. So your graph is going to be like that this time. So your asymptotes this time are the line y equals 0 and the line x equals minus 2. Another way of thinking about it is just to look at this equation and say, well, what value of x is impossible? So what value can you not put in? What value must you exclude from the domain? We're doing it in terms of functions. What value can you not put in there? Well, we know we can't divide by 0, so x can't be minus 2. So that gives you that line. And then you can say, well, that is then how this graph is going to look like. It's a reciprocal graph, it's 1 over something, so that's the shape it's going to be.